Hi everyone, my name is Julia DiNovi. I'm the Chief of Staff at micro1 and will be moderating our panel this evening. Thank you so much again for coming. This is a conversation that we're so excited about and really appreciate you all being here. So to kick us off, let's start with some intros for our lovely panelists and we'll pass it to Izzy.
Thanks, Julia. I'm Izzy. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm also part of the micro1 team. I lead our enterprise business, so I work with AI startups, larger companies, healthcare organizations, and all of the incredible experts as well. So excited to be here and chat with you guys.
Hi everyone, my name is Anjali. I lead our AI product team here at Whoop. I've been at Whoop for about 2 years. Prior to Whoop, I started as an engineer at Salesforce and then started a women's health company that was delivering nutrition guidance to women with hormonal disorders. So this whole topic feels super close to my heart and so excited that it's all come full circle now at Whoop.
Hi everyone, I'm Jen. I'm the COO and founder of Lyv Health, spelled Lyv. I'm here today because I'm also just personally super passionate about women's health and AI. My background's engineering. I did med device for about the past 10 years, and I'm now actually at Harvard doing an MBA and Master's in AI and Comp Sci. And in general, Lyv was built out of a lot of the inequities we see in healthcare, especially for women's health. We have since expanded to now working with wellness businesses to offer to male and female clients medicalized services like prescriptions, peptides, and lab testing and more. But there's a ton of huge women's health applications and excited to talk more about that today.
Awesome, so we're going to kick it off with some questions and then we'll save some time at the end for any questions from the group here. So in your own words, how are AI and technology reshaping the healthcare landscape for women, both as patients and professionals? Whoever feels called to speak, answer.
I guess I'll kick this off. I'll pass it to you guys. I think in general what's been really interesting about AI and how it's changing women's health is that I think it's finally giving women the tools to quantitatively see that what's been in their head for so long and what they've felt really strongly. Now they're able to replicate in numbers, whether that's wearables like Aura, Whoop, feeding that into Claude or ChatGPT or your AI of choice. And being able to start analyzing it, coming to your doctor and saying, no, something is wrong, here's what my blood testing is showing, here's the research I've done. And so unfortunately, there's still huge gaps in healthcare, but I think women are now starting to have more of the tools, albeit informally now, and hopefully formally with a little bit more security in the future, to be able to advocate for themselves. And I think that's really exciting because now that we're seeing this interest, we can provide the products and the technology to just continue to fuel that fire.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. I think the ability to empower women with information has been such an incredible shift from the pre-AI era. I think on the patient side, one thing that I feel especially excited about with AI is just the ability to synthesize and aggregate all of these different data sources. So women on average, for certain women's health conditions, it can take up to 6 provider visits to get diagnosed. And so if someone is seeing a fertility specialist, an endocrinologist, their PCP, a therapist, every provider has a different slice of your data and a different slice of your health. And AI is never going to replace the expertise of these incredible providers, but it can serve as the connective tissue across these providers, and it gives patients that 360 view of their health. I think as a professional, I feel extremely excited as a woman in AI. I think there's some research that shows that women take on over 200 hours of work each year on unpromotable tasks at work. So things like taking notes, sending out calendar invites, making sure teams are aligned on things that wouldn't necessarily get them promoted, and they're doing a lot more of that load in the office. And then, of course, women are taking on so much of that load at home, right? So research shows women take on 70% of the cognitive load of managing a household and kids. And so AI can now automate so much of those tasks, from sending emails to taking notes for you and managing a kid's soccer schedule. And I think it is truly buying back time that can go back into your own professional development in your career. So I feel very excited for the opportunities for women, specifically in their careers.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything you both said. And the biggest thing that comes to mind for me is the concept of access and thinking about, a special a specialist, whether it's a fertility specialist, and if you live somewhere where there might not be that type of clinic nearby, but with telehealth, has been just insane seeing it develop over the past few years, and how connected all of these data sources are as well. And so you can take the past month of your personal data and send it to someone really quickly, and they can synthesize it, and then you can meet with them face-to-face virtually and have a really informed 2-hour-long conversation about what's going on with your unique health journey. And so I think on the patient side, having this kind of access to these providers is really unique and only growing with AI. And I think also having the providers having that access is really helpful. And when all of these more kind of manual tasks are automated, they have more time to really explore and think about their patients in a more intentional way. So I think that's one thing that's really special that AI and technology are bringing back for women's health.
Yeah, so this is a perfect segue into our next question. So can you guys each give us a brief overview of where AI shows up in your day-to-day life, job? Yeah, would love a little color on that.
Yeah, sure, I can start. Well, working at an AI startup, AI, whether I like it or not, shows up everywhere. But I think where we really spend a lot of time is thinking about kind of the reliability and the human side of AI at micro1. So not only just thinking about AI and using ChatGPT or Claude or whatever it might be in my day-to-day to, again, manually or automate these more manual tasks, but really thinking of it as a platform and a responsibility of how we can interact with these systems and interact with these platforms, really to ensure that we are using them in the most responsible way for the greater good. So for developing new drugs or identifying new diseases and cures, for example, is really one way that we're kind of thinking about how can we bring humans into these conversations to ensure that the highest quality data and guardrails are up to make sure that as AI continuously permeates into all parts of our life, it's being done in a very responsible and intentional way as well.
I think as leading an AI product team, I think we are using AI sort of day in and day out in our work. That ranges from using AI as a thought partner, so working with Claude on ideas that I'm fleshing out, or having it help me synthesize user feedback from interviews and turning that into a more coherent strategy for the team. I'm using it all the time to test out ideas. I'm also using it a lot as a tool, so I'm in Claude Code all the time and sort of writing my agents there, figuring out how users are using this, writing evaluations for those agents within Claude Code. And we have an incredible team at Whoop who's set up so many AI tools for the company as well. So even being able to interact with tools like Snowflake and ask questions about our data, it frees up so much time from our product analytics team and helps them be able to focus on really deep strategic questions. And as a PM, I get to just ask questions to our data and get that info very quickly. As a consumer, I'm using AI as well. I think Whoop Coach is obviously the product we work on at Whoop on the AI side, so dog fooding that all the time, but using it to plan trips, I'm teaching my parents how to use it. I think it's a very empowering tool to use. I think one thing to touch on is where I'm not using AI, and I think that's also an important piece of this, and I think it's easy to go to AI these days for anything, and I think there's a very human element still at work around making sure you're still having those cross-functional conversations, you're bringing the different perspectives to the table, you're doing the human relationship building and the work to make sure you're all operating on the same information before you take that and start co-thinking with AI and using it as a tool to build a new perspective.
Yeah, I pretty much echo that. I mean, as a founder, you're trying to do everything as quickly as possible with the least man or woman power. And so 100% using it as a thought partner, also myself in Claude Code and various tools. I think in general, as a founder, because we're creating so many of our workflows to the point about where am I not using it, a lot of my customer discovery we're still doing in person, having that conversation, because an AI, it's not quite there yet anyways to replace those kind of things, but even if it was, I don't think it would be as perceptive in how to, oh, I want to ask this question next, or I want to dive deeper into this. Where we are using AI is once we have enough of that human-to-human loop when it comes to processes. As COO, I run a lot of the ops and tech. So once those processes, we go through enough reps and we start to understand and crystallize what that workflow is, then we start asking what AI tools will work to help automate this. My favorite is my founding engineer and I will often talk about our assistants and what our assistants have helped us do that day in terms of our code, which are obviously our like Claude and ChatGPT buddies that are helping us out. So really using it everywhere, and then as a consumer too, time is money, and so using it across the board. I think it's just been really exciting to see how many of my non-technical friends, being at business school and being at engineering school, everyone's building, even in the business school. No one's letting, like, not having a technical background hold them back, which I think is really exciting and really empowering to be like, you know, just because I'm not a software engineer with 10 years of experience doesn't mean I can't contribute to our code base and like facilitate our engineering too.
Awesome. And Jen, specific question for you. You come from a background in FDA approvals and med tech operations, which means you really clearly understand the clinical rigor as well as any regulatory hurdles that are coming up that some founders could potentially skip over. So as AI starts powering diagnostics and these personalized health results, how do we make sure that it meets the bar that these patients actually deserve?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think a lot of it was touched on actually previously, just about creating the right guardrails and making sure you're doing your homework there. I do think, to me, I think we're still figuring out how to really put in the right guardrails and evaluations and really make that foolproof to the way that now, with years and years and years, we've developed that for the most part when it comes to hardware or more traditional software in the regulatory space. So I think it's important to acknowledge we're all still learning this. But in general, I think when it comes to a lot of these tools, when you're in software and it's not related to healthcare, you can kind of try it, break it, fix it, and you can't do that as much in healthcare. Things have to be a lot more buttoned up, and I do think there'll be a human in the loop for a while in healthcare applications. What I am really optimistic about is I do feel like the FDA is showing signals that they are really receptive to this change in technology, as well as changes in other areas too. I mean, we're at WHOOP, and there was a whole effort, I think, led by WHOOP around really evolving the wellness category around those blood pressure cuff readings. So I think in general, what I've seen from the FDA is they are continuing to release guidances on how companies can do when it comes to wellness, when it comes to AI, and I think it's going to have to all evolve together. At the end of the day, I think when it comes to healthcare especially, you can't pass the buck. You can't create something and say as long as the FDA approves it, it's fine. I do think you have to be 100% comfortable that you've done everything you can with your product, even if the FDA is also doing the same thing in their role too.
Awesome. And Izzy, so when it comes to healthcare AI specifically, whose expertise is being used to train these models, and how do we make sure that women's clinical knowledge and lived experience are proportionally represented in this process?
Yeah, so I think it's important to preface this by saying, of course, everyone is training models and agents in their own way, but I can speak to what we've seen at micro1, in which Sydney alluded to. We work with domain experts like healthcare professionals, bankers, lawyers, to train and evaluate AI models and agents. And so what we see is a very wide range of data sources and knowledge and expertise being put into these agents and models. And I think in the healthcare domain specifically, there's of course so much static yet high quality, highly confidential data like health records and studies and medical literature. And so there's so much data, and what I think is where we're at today is a really interesting and important inflection point, especially for bringing women's voices into the conversation, because we are working with experts who will look through medical records, they'll look through literature, they'll make connections that as of now only humans can make. And so it's important that we think about centering women's voices and bringing women's voices into the conversation when they're not there. And it's really important for also product leaders to be thinking about this, and especially if you're building products for women, or what types of products you're building and whose voices you want to be in the foundations of these models and in these agents, because at the end of the day, that's where it's learning from. So right now is the exact right time to make sure that female doctors, nurses, healthcare workers, you name it, pharmacists, they're the ones who are being brought into the conversation, because of course we all know over history there's been a large disparity in the amount of female health records or female doctors included in these types of conversations. And so now, while AI is still relatively young, we need to ensure that these people across all genders are being brought into the conversation, so we can correct the wrongs that have been made over time and ensure that there's a really wide range of data being included in the training of these models and systems.
Awesome. And speaking of all of this data and these inputs, Anjali, WHOOP tracks sleep recovery, strain, and hormonal cycles, which is a large amount of continuous data. And where do you see AI taking that data next, particularly for women's health insights? That was something that we couldn't just access before.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it goes back to the ability for AI to connect the dots across these data sets. So just to root that in an example, we've launched advanced labs, and it can measure your vitamin D levels. It shows that in the app. And if a woman was having poor sleep over time, and we just kept telling her, you're not getting enough sleep, you need to get more than 8 hours in bed, it's a very different type of guidance that woman also has low vitamin D, and we can now connect those dots and say it's actually not about necessarily getting more time in bed as much as it could be a deficiency that is leading to these types of symptoms. And so the ability to take in women's health specific research around how those types of symptoms might show up for women, identify the right metrics in our data set to then pull those together and tell a bigger story, really changes the way we interpret data at WHOOP. And I think it is a lot of responsibility, like you said, in terms of how are we making sure we're aggregating this in a research-backed way, working with the experts to understand what is the type of guidance and insight we can give that feels responsible and empowers women versus fear-mongers or sort of, has an alarmist tone in some ways. And so there's a lot of responsibility around how we aggregate that data and bring it together. I think the second place that I feel very excited about in terms of the future of what AI can do for women is really on the predictive and pattern recognition side. I think when you think about the fact that women are 50% more likely to be misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed in terms of having a heart attack, it's not the fault of the physician or the technology. It's the fact that they were trained to identify patterns that look different in women compared to men. And so when we can now train our AI to look for female-specific patterns on how these types of conditions show up, we now have the ability to predict certain conditions for women, or help them understand and intervene before a condition turns into something more serious, because we can train our AI on these types of patterns that healthcare providers may not have picked up on or learned in their training. And to no fault of their own, those women were just excluded from the research that training was built on. So I think there's so many opportunities for AI to bring it together. I think there's a lot of responsibility, and we hold a lot of, I feel a lot of responsibility to our members to make sure we're saying the right things. Women can trust the AI, and it's interesting that, even though generally I think women adopt AI at about 25% a lower rate than men, at WHOOP we actually see women using the WHOOP AI features at a 30% higher rate than men. And I think it just shows the hunger they have for these insights that they're not getting anywhere else. And it's a really unique type of power that we can give back to them by giving them these types of insights. Yeah.
Awesome. That really resonates. Jen, so Lyv Health is built on the premise that traditional healthcare can sometimes fail women, leaving them with symptoms and no answers and running around in circles. Where does AI fit into fixing that broken experience, and what does it actually need to do to earn women's trust?
I think we've already touched on a lot of those gaps already in some of the past questions in terms of the data aggregation really being the connective tissue that pulls everything together. I do also think kind of to the connective tissue maybe a step further, that it's not just in identifying what's wrong, but it's also in what happens next, how do you coach them through that, how do you make sure they have access to whatever that treatment might be. And that's really where what we're doing with Lyv Health comes in, because we really see that, especially when it comes to more longevity or well care, that there is an access issue. There are areas of the country where there are clinicians who are not as up to speed on hormone therapy or willing to experiment in terms of microdosing GLPs or other things. That's a consumer's choice if they do want to pursue that or not. And that's where we're really excited about helping with that access and pairing that with a wellness professional you're already working with, whether that's a health coach, nutritionist, and you want to have labs like with Whoop, or starting to pair certain wearable insights with maybe a menopause coach that you're working with. There's endless women's health applications. And I do think trust is that missing piece as well too. We've all had an AI spit out something that we know is completely wrong or later realized is completely wrong. And so I do think it comes with the guardrails that we're taking the responsibility. But also I think pairing that with the right kind of support structure around it too. So that's why at Lyv Health you can get some of these things just by going to Hims and Hers or any other pill mill if you want. But we're really focused on consciously partnering with those wellness businesses, because you do have a trusted relationship with that person. You can ask questions of that person. And then pairing AI tools and additional medical options like prescriptions, lab testing, whatever that may be, with that trusted person, I think that's really when it all succeeds. And it is also kind of a footnote that shouldn't be a footnote in terms of this conversation, is that's also when you see the best healthcare outcomes, right? When you have a more integrative approach, when you are able to combine wellness with healthcare, with technology, with maybe your daily wearable, when you have all of that working together and aligned and providing all that data, that is when you see the best healthcare outcomes. So I think ultimately too, you start trusting AI when you start feeling better, and that's the goal of all this too.
Awesome. So one last question for each of you, and then we'll open it up to some questions from the group. So what is one thing that you would like every woman to walk away believing about AI and her own health?
I guess I'll start off. I think it's a little bit less health related, but I do think what I've seen day to day, to the point about women adopting AI at 25% less rate than men, is that I do think we're at an inflection point. And I think the only way we can fix that is getting in the game, not sitting on the sidelines. So I think whether that comes to your health, personal health as a consumer, whether that comes to the healthcare industry in general, or any industry, I think what's encouraging and what I want women to realize is that I'm in classes and in programs with people who did PhDs and masters in AI a couple of years ago. And everything they learned is now completely irrelevant. So like the playing field is pretty level here, and not disparaging, obviously you're at there is something to be said for all that experience, but you should be motivated that it's not like you're behind. We're all figuring this out. And I think the more you can do to get involved, the better, because we really do need to make sure women's voices are part of whatever this next stage becomes.
I just have a question. How many folks have built something with AI in this room? Okay, that's amazing. So we're definitely in a room with a lot of builders, which is great. Yeah, my advice would just be, I think, lean into building. And women hold 80% of the consumer purchasing power in the U.S. and those solutions are being built by men right now. And I think that when you have the ability to take your own insights, your experience, and turn that into a real solution that works for you, for other people, it's incredibly empowering, and it's an incredible business opportunity. And I think that women bring a very different perspective to building with the unique skill set that we can bring to the table. And so I would very much encourage, AI is moving so fast right now, and it can feel overwhelming. It can feel like it's just a slew of things on LinkedIn and Twitter, and I would just say, try to ignore the noise and take 2 hours a week, even if you can carve that out, to say, I'm going to watch these 2 YouTube videos and read this one blog, and just give yourself an AI curriculum almost each week, where you're teaching yourself how to build, you're teaching yourself how to use it, and think about a real problem you have in your own life related to your health, whether that's tracking your food or figuring out how to master your sleep schedule and apply those skills to that real problem you have and see if you can build a solution for yourself and have 5 people test that and see where it goes. I just think there's so much room and so much opportunity, and I would encourage everyone to just keep building, keep learning.
Yeah, definitely stay involved and keep using all of these different incredible tools because they're collecting data, and all of these systems, whether it's a model or an agent or an app, they're really only as strong as the data on which they're built. And so it's so important that very different, diverse people are using all of these tools and these systems. And I think a big topic right now is that AI is coming and it's taking over, but there is, you still have so much uniqueness in your individual self, just from your healthcare data, but also your perspective. So whether you want to be on the training side and, working with a company like micro1 to help improve these agents and models, or you just want to keep using an AI photo editing app, that's important too. So just staying involved however you can, I think, is, just what I would say.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much. So would love to open it up for a couple of questions from the audience, if you guys. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for doing this. I'm Palak. I'm doing my MBA at HBS and very curious about the space, also building in the space. I'm curious about I researched that there are about 200 plus agents that Whoop has already deployed. So what in that space has been that you've been surprised by based on the user behavior, and what is something that you expected that would happen and would improve the agents and products that have already been deployed?
It's a great question. I think what has been surprising is how much people have developed a more personal relationship with Whoop AI than we would have expected. And so I think the brand of Whoop is very data-driven, very performance-focused, and that was sort of our initial starting point with elite athletes. And obviously we've grown a lot to a very diversified user base. But when we first started Whoop Coach, it was a very data-oriented tool. It was really focused on answering questions about your data and analyzing that for you. I think with the launch of AI memory and the ability for us to hold context about someone's life and use that to help coach them on specific parts of their health, we realized people were really developing a companion-like relationship with the tool versus a tool that is just sort of analyzing their data. And I think that really shifted the product roadmap and even thinking about how do we build a real relationship and measure that relationship to know that we are being trustworthy, to know we're not just agreeing with what the member says to make them feel like they like Whoop Coach more and build that relationship, right? We have a responsibility to be truthful, be honest, and at the same time be engaging and build that type of relationship. So that's been quite surprising, the level of companionship people can develop with an AI tool. I think what's been what I would have expected is maybe the fact that with AI, I think people expect a very, very high level of personalization. Nowadays, people can go vibe code their own solution to any problem that they have, and it can be hyper-personalized, exactly the problem that they're facing. And so that leaves bigger companies in a difficult spot because we know we want to build solutions that work for all of our members, and at the same time we know that they're being exposed to solutions that are hyper personalized to them. And it's something we continue to work on, but something I think will only become more and more of a core focus of the team of how do we empower people with personalized solutions while not alienating other parts of our member base. Yeah.
Questions over
Hello, thank you for being here. I'm Mia Zhang. I work for Izzy Nova, and we're building AI tool for both provider and patient. I think something interesting I'm observing so far is there definitely some user very eager to jump into those AI tools built for them, and there are also other user who's more old school or more cautious about AI tool. So one thing I'm trying to learn to figure out is for those more old school users, how can we make it easier for them to adapt? I would love to hear learning from you all.
Happy to take this one. I mean, I think I think it really comes down to showing value up front from these tools and understanding why did they come to this in the first place, what are the problems they're having, and can you deliver the value they're specifically looking for rather than sort of branding it as AI and AI is going to solve all your problems. It's like interesting that members over 60 are some of our most engaged users with Whoop AI, and that does feel very surprising, but I think part of that is because, and we have a number of hypotheses around that, is like they might not have as much of a community around them day to day where they can talk about these data, their data and their metrics with, or ask questions to, and so they've gone really deep with this sort of like companion where they can have long conversations. And maybe they were never onboarded to something like ChatGPT where they were doing that, but because they already have the Whoop app, that's where they ended up learning how to use this. But I think it came from first delivering value to them. Like the first tool we did was sort of a day in review and end of day report, and it didn't require the member to ask anything. It didn't require them to know how to use this tool. They just had to read a report. And I think starting with the value delivery can get people more comfortable and build trust slowly rather than just throwing them into the deep end with a empty text box and you're like, oh, go figure this out.
And I'll just add briefly from like a healthcare context. I think that's where getting buy-in from the provider or whatever that specific provider relationship looks like is really key. That's part of what we do in working with wellness businesses is we align ourselves to the programming the wellness business is doing, and then the wellness person that they have a trusted relationship with is advocating or not for tools if it makes sense for them. So I think there is a human aspect to that too in terms of helping build that trust in a way that can kind of kickstart and then continue to build as they use the actual tool.
Hi, I'm Allie. I've been really impressed as a Whoop user on that balance of giving data as well as a companion-like advice at times, and I'm kind of curious what strategies you use, whether in the design process or even in the technical building phases, to make sure that there's going to be that empathy in the AI agent's response when it's giving guidance, especially in these healthcare scenarios.
It's a great question, and it's definitely not something we always get right, but something I think our team has built a really strong muscle of experimenting on. Kate, analytics director at Whoop, and has an amazing analytics team that has supported us so much in running dozens and dozens of A/B tests on things like tone, on types of questions we ask, length of response, how many data points do we include in each response before it could get overwhelming to a member, when do we see them drop off, and so interestingly, like a number of our hypotheses on the team are proven to be wrong when we end up doing these tests at a much larger scale. So I think it's something that we continue to test our way through. I think design and UX plays a massive role in building trust with these tools as well. So Holly on the design team, I think they have thought deeply about how do we introduce these types of features to our members through onboarding, through teaching members they can turn off memory at any time, or they can turn off coach at any time, and it's sort of like we've given members that power to be in control of this experience, and through that onboarding they can share things like, I prefer a coach that's very empathetic and soft, or I prefer a coach who's really hard on me, and with memory we can then pull those preferences in to make sure we're speaking to a member in the tone that they prefer.
Hi, I'm Sumana. I work for InterSystems. I've been using AI pretty extensively. I'm an engineer. So I'm curious, with everybody white coding, what do you think future would look like, and how as women we can stand out and build better tools?
Yeah, I can start. I'm not an engineer myself, but from what we've seen, it's a little bit like I was alluding to earlier, to just keep going. And I think that your unique perspective is going to come through in whatever you build. And so it's easy to get discouraged, and especially I think as a woman in this field. But in order to really make change and keep pushing it forward, your unique perspective is going to have to come through in whatever you're trying to build. If you're trying to build something that's just comparable to something else that's already out there, then it's going to be a lot harder for that to really stand out and come through. And so, bringing in whatever you think is unique to your asset or skill set or industry, and taking that and really trying to center that at the heart of whatever you're building is what I would say. But anything from an engineering background?
Yeah, I can speak to, I think, where I see vibe coding fall short is especially when it comes to like architecture level decisions. And tech debt obviously adds up as you're continuing to edit anything. And as you transition to it being production level, especially in healthcare settings. So I do think vibe coding, and especially tools like Claude and like Cursor and Windsurf are really great for engineering, but I do think where you can stand out is kind of knowing when to listen to that and when to like pause and go a little bit slower. Because what I do see is people who don't have the engineering background that you're mentioning and can't think about, okay, from an architecture standpoint, it's going to touch all these things, or how do I think about security and make sure that is sustained as I'm continuing to vibe code. That's where you can fall behind or create holes that can be very disastrous at a production level, especially when it comes to healthcare. And so I do think that's what sets people apart, and where there is still a little bit of that gap from someone vibe coding to engineering background.
Thanks for this great presentation. I'm yours truly a victim of perimenopause. Okay. With that being said, I also have the background of healthcare, working at Brigham and Women's Hospital, and my current experience is that data is great with the technology and all. However, the healthcare system in place right now, whether it's doctors communicating back and forth to give that holistic ecosystem that you need as a patient, is lacking. So how does Lyv and WHOOP address these loopholes and broken ends in the healthcare system to provide that service that someone going through this can have a seamless experience?
Yeah, and I think everyone's experience is different. So where Lyv starts is we partner with the wellness business. So for instance, in perimenopause, sometimes women will go to a health coach, or they'll be seeing an NP, someone where there is more face time than you would get from your standard OBGYN clinician at an annual appointment. And then from there, our clinicians partner with the health coach. So there is that constant line of communication.
Yeah.
And when it comes to, and not only those two, but also with the patient, right? Because it really does require that full circle ecosystem, so you are getting feedback, especially when it comes to perimenopause, which, given what a lot of what we know, you can't really tell everything going on just from your hormone labs, right? Like there's so much more going on from what is day-to-day life like? What are stressors like? What are your symptoms like? How is that adjusted? Or what side effects are you receiving with whatever latest prescriptions you're doing? So that's where within Lyv, we have a client portal and an admin portal, where from a client perspective, you're able to see what your prescriptions are, what your statuses are, and dialogue directly with the clinician. Obviously, you're able to dialogue directly with your wellness professional, however that normally goes. And then the wellness professional and the clinician through Lyv are able to communicate as well too. So that's how we create that ecosystem. But we do believe it does need to center a lot of these conditions. It really does center around the lifestyle advice and changes that are coming from the wellness professional, aided in conjunction with the medicalized features as it makes sense for someone. It may not make sense for everyone. So that's where we ground within the wellness and then support from there.
I think the only thing I would add to that from the WHOOP perspective is the ability to give power back to the consumer to be in control of that conversation more. And so, asking WHOOP AI, I'm about to go to this provider, what data does this person need to know about me, or what is a summary of what I can share with them that would give them a broader picture of my health beyond what I might share in an intake. I think WHOOP is doing some incredible work on the healthcare side to really think about how are we bringing clinicians directly into the experience when we see an issue in their data, or there is a reason for them to need that immediate type of care, and how can we make that gap really reduce that gap between time of insight to time to care. And I think that the roadmap is incredible, and I'm really excited about some of the things coming. But in the meantime, I think the idea of putting the consumer in control of their data rather than waiting for the provider to ask them that question or to connect those dots for them. I think we live in an era where that's not possible, and I think it's an incredible place to be. Yeah. So we're going to take one more question here.
Hi, I'm Kashish. I work in clinical research. We've already seen a lot of research papers out there from MIT and Harvard saying that the biases that existed in the society pre-AI are increasing. How are you guys training your data or putting on guardrails to make sure that biases across gender, race are actually decreasing and healthcare is given out in a more equitable way?
Yeah, I can start off. So a lot of the way that AI has been trained today is on static data. And of course, all of these companies are really excited to use AI, and they have years and years of all of these, spreadsheets and PDFs and documents, but that is what history has produced. And so naturally, when that's fed into an AI system, that's what it's going to spit out as well, which is why we're, again, like I had talked about earlier, making sure that we're bringing in, human judgment as it stands today from a very diverse group of individuals, race, gender, ethnicity, everything, and making sure that, these are the people who are giving the guardrails and telling the AI and teaching the AI exactly, where these boundaries are and pulling out or trying to pull out bias when it can. And so that's when we work with these companies to understand exactly what kind of outputs they want their systems to be producing, and where human judgment is so important is in detecting where there is bias and correcting it so that we can overcome it before it just continuously is trained on these more outdated, heavily biased systems.
That is the end of this panel. Great job. Thanks, everyone.